All right, let's get started. Everybody's doing well. Hey, thanks for joining me. Man, we got a cool show put together. Oh man. So if you had a chance to watch some of the blasts that went out, what we're going to talk about today is as a performer, I can execute in practice, but I cannot execute in competition. Give me a thumbs up or give me a hey, that's me, or I do that while you're watching this, because it happens to probably 95% of the athletes in sports. So in this broadcast, I'm going to shed some light and give you answers to why athletes have a problem executing in competition, but they can execute in practice. And I'm going to share with you some stories and live situation that working with one of our onboarding athletes, and that are just like you, right? And they've implemented these solutions into their training, and it's changing their game. That's what I'm excited to share with you. So if we've never met before, I'm Sean Humphreys. I'm a high performance coach. I specialize in changing the performance of individuals, whether you're a highly skilled athlete or you're on your way to being one, or just want to improve your performance, you're in the right place. All right, so to make sure you can hear me, give me a thumbs up. Let me know where you're watching from. I love to hear the different states, even around the country. Matter of fact, I had a coaching call last night from China, late in the evening, with an academy over there that I'm working with. So it's great to do this stuff, to broadcast it around the world. Also, to let you know, we're on YouTube channel at Sean Humphreys, live right now, and coming to you on that. So, man, let's dive into this. So how many of you perform well in training and you suffer in competition? Just thumbs up. Hey, it's me. I do that. And you're shaking the head. And you don't understand why you hit great shots in training and you hit such poor shots in competition. How many of you experience this? Here's the good news. You're not alone. All right? And even better news, I have solutions for you. So what I want to do is, first of all, I want to share a story from one of my college onboarding students. And just yesterday, we had our weekly coaching call, and just coincidentally, she had just finished a competition. She's a junior in high school. We'll protect her name. We won't use it. And she just finished competition. And so I was reviewing her performance analysis, right? So at the end of every training session, every qualifying, after they play, or even in competition, our athletes are required to complete their performance analysis, which basically gives them the opportunity to unpack their day. Everything's defined in it, what they write. It's all designed to draw out the solutions, what they need to work on, why they need to work on it, what they did well, and even in training, what segments they worked on them, why they worked on them, what's their goal statement. So it's a lot of really good information that I get to see from how they unpack their day, and we teach them how to do that. That is all uploaded to one of their training spaces. So all these athletes that we work with in the onboarding piece all have their individual training spaces. And the reason we have those is because everything's timelined, it's documented, it's uploaded, and so that we can go back and review it, or if they need to go back so they don't have to fin through emails or go through text. So it's very streamlined and very organized. And when you have a lot of athletes and even professional athletes and sports teams that you're working with, boy, it sure helps me stay organized. So, and here's the thing too, is that it's good for me, but it's even better for the athlete, because they can go straight to the things that are uploaded. So also when they upload their analysis from training or qualifying, it's good for me, but it's better for them because I get to coach them. So we're on this coaching call, right? And I want to share with you some of the dialogue. And just like I said, hey coach, I said, how's it going? How was the performance? And she goes, hey, it went okay. She goes, I did accomplish my goal, but I need some solutions to some things, and I'd like to discuss it. I'm like, okay, so what do you got? She basically said, hey, I'm not hitting many greens in competition. Matter of fact, I'm hitting very few greens, and also I'm missing fairways. And bottom line, how do I fix it? And she goes, here's the interesting piece. She goes, I hit it really good in practice and in training, but not in competition. And she goes, that's what the quandary is. And I said, so where you tilted? And she goes, well, I think I might work on my golf swing more. And I'm like, okay, so let's just hold it right there. So we kind of parked it right there. And I said, here's the interesting piece for me, is that she's talking about outcome of the shot in regards to the target, okay? And we get tilted a little bit of talking a little bit about outcome. So I asked her, I said, so what did you do for a solution when you were out there on the golf course? And what solutions were you trying to put in place to help correct this? And I'm not necessarily looking for a technical answer, but more, is it strategy? Are you committed to the strategy? The commitment phase? Or are you running the mindset program and being able to control your thoughts? Are you reinforcing after the shot? So if you followed me much, you'll hear me talk about, the number one mental error. And the number one mental error is overtraining or overtrying, excuse me. And so her comment was, she goes, Coach, I kept trying as hard as I could to try to hit the target. And again, it falls back to that number one mental error of overtrying, right? And I said, so what happened? She goes, it just got worse, and it kept getting worse. And she goes, thank goodness for my short game, and you pushed the short game harder than anybody in our putting. And she goes, that was my safety net. I'm like, okay, so let's talk about these. Let's talk about this. I said, so did you have any solutions? She goes, I really didn't. She goes, even on the fairways and hitting the fairways, I was trying so hard to hit the fairways, and it just wasn't happening. It wasn't happening on the greens. It wasn't happening on the fairways. And all of a sudden, it eventually manifests itself, and now it starts to spiral. And so this is what happens is that it eventually starts to spiral, and you begin to question your strategy. And why do you question your strategy? It's because you're so consumed with outcome of the shot. You're so worried about where the ball's going to go and where it will end up. Your focus has shifted from following the steps of performing well, to focusing purely on outcome. And when this happens, performance drops. The second you start focusing on, or you're worried about where the ball is going to go, or where you're going to throw the pitch, or where you're going to hit it, where you're going to throw it, performance starts dropping. And so what can happen is that you can drift so far away from your steps of performing well that you can't even commit to the strategy of the shot. Now, when you can't even commit to the strategy, man, you're in trouble, okay? Even more, you walk up to the shot now, and you're so worried about where the ball might go that now you can't even build a strategy. So now you've gone from not even being able to build a strategy to be able to try to even trust the strategy and then commit to the strategy and execute the shot. So how can you, when you're in this state, right? We've all been there, and that's what we're talking about with her, is that when you're in this state, how can you possibly even begin to rehearse the swing, the chip, the putt, the pitch shot, when now you can't even trust it? Does any of this sound familiar to you? I deal with this a lot, and with athletes. So let's look at this just in other sports, right? So we're going to park that right now with her in that situation. Let's talk about a baseball pitcher, right? Let's say he's on the mound, he's in the game, and he gets behind in the pitch count. And, or he gives up a couple hits. And then all of a sudden he gets behind in the pitch count again, and now he's got multiple batters, and he starts overtrying. And it only gets worse. And then he starts questioning the strategy. He might even be questioning the signals that are being called. Then let's say he gives up another hit or even a walk. Then he begins to question his technique. and then he completely abandons his program or his steps that he's trusted so much that allowed him to perform. Now think about this. What if he doesn't have any steps to follow or framework to follow, and he's been focusing purely on his skill to get him around? It happens in golf all the time with young athletes. They're focusing purely on their skill, and when they get to hitting it bad, they got nothing to go to. And so like a pitcher, he doesn't have anything to go to get himself on track. He's purely relying on his skills. You're in trouble. So what the athlete doesn't recognize is that his skills are not hitting the target. They're not hitting the catcher. They're hitting the strike zone. It's not his skills that's not hitting the target. It's not his skills. It's his mindset. More importantly, it's his self-image. And there are no steps for the player or athlete to reset. These are the things that we work with our athletes on to help them on the reset and help them follow their steps. And we're going to discuss that. What about a baseball batter, right? Same thing. Maybe he misses a few easy hits. He gets behind in the pitch count, strikes out a couple times, grounds out a couple times, and then all of a sudden now he starts over trying, and he's really starts striking out. Then he starts questioning his strategy. He questions, okay, what pitches does he go after? And it just manifests itself, right? And then he has no framework or no steps to follow to get him back on track. Remember when I first sat down with Drew Brees and with the Saints, I had the opportunity to do some work with Sean Payton and the Saints, and we were having these conversations around this type of framework. And he's like, oh my gosh, he goes, this framework helps athletes stay on track when they get off track. And I'm like, yeah, because it helps them focus on performing, the steps of performing, and following the steps of performing. See, as parents or as spectators, we see the athlete performing. We don't see the steps of the performing that they go through. And as a coach, as me, that's what I see. That's what I teach and train and coach these athletes to follow these steps in performing. And that's how you change. That's how they change performance and get really good at it. So, for example, maybe even a QB. Oh, I got a great story. This is really cool. So, I spent time with Coach Bill Parcells when he was in Dallas with the Dallas Cowboys. Spent those 3 seasons with him, and learning how athletes train for stressful situations. Brought a lot of that stuff back into the academy. And Sean Payton was there, and that's how I met him, and the late Tony Sperano, and of course Mike Zimmer, who's at Minnesota, right? So we are talking about this same situation with athletes trying to perfect things, trying to make things perfect, trying to hit the target, overtraining, overtrying. And so he told me this story about Phil Simms when he was quarterbacking for him. And Phil was an absolute perfectionist. He said it was actually one of the best quarterbacks he'd ever coached. And he said Phil was just trying to hit every pass and make it precise on the money. I get that piece, but he goes, he was trying to make it perfect. And he was starting to have some trouble with it. So he and Phil were having a conversation before a game, and actually it was like, a few days before, and he says, look, all I want you to do is to go out in this game, and all I want you to do is I want you to throw me as many interceptions as you can. And Phil looked at him like he was nuts. And he says, yep, I want you to throw me a bunch of interceptions today. And Phil's like, dude, you're crazy. So he went out and had the best performance that he had ever had in his career. And they won a big game. And Bill was telling me, he goes, we had the conversation afterwards. And I said, so what did you do out there, Phil? He goes, man, I just tried to throw interceptions and I couldn't. And I just kept hitting the passer because I wasn't trying to hit the passer. I was just trying to throw it close to him. And it happens in place kickers. It happens in punters, swimmers, divers. athletes in archery, rifle shooting. All of these strategies, not all of these strategies, but all of these programs, the systems and the steps in performing that we have to be mindful of. And we're going to talk about these. So the number one reason why athletes begin to experience this is competition. Here's the thing, is athletes start experiencing this type of pressure and they can't keep focused on performing. And here's the reason why, is because competition has higher consequences. I mean, wouldn't you agree? I mean, that it does, right? It's more stressful. There's more anxiety. There's tension. And there's pressure to get it done. But let me ask you a question. Does your training represent stressful situations to the point that you feel the pressure, the tension, and the stress? My guess is it probably doesn't, because the majority of all the athletes that I train don't train like that. They don't train for stressful situations. What I've witnessed in my years is that majority of all training, I wouldn't say all training, but the majority of the training and the majority of the sports all tilt towards training technique, especially after a poor performance. They all go to the technique, and that's all they know. And it actually does more damage than it does good. So what does this all have to do with the student that I'm talking to? Because she said, hey, I'm having issues hitting the greens and I'm having issues hitting the fairways. Okay? So I asked her, I said, tell me, how was your putting in competition? She perked up and said, Coach, I'm putting really well. And I putted really well in competition. I said, okay, so what areas are you putting well in? And she said, my 4-footers. She said, man, my 4-footers are incredible. She goes, I make every one of them I look at. And I made every one of them in this tournament. I said, okay, what else in your putting is great? She goes, my distance putting. She goes, I've 2-putted or better on all my greens in the last 2 events. So now I want you to think about that just for a second. What I just said. She said, I have 2-putted or better all my greens in the last 2 events. So she's telling me what she's doing and what she wants to do. Here's what most of the golfers would say. Now they might have accomplished this, but they'd say, I haven't 3-putted in the last 2 events. Rule of thumb, you don't ever say what you don't want. Just by mentioning the 3 putts, you don't want to talk about 3 putts because that's what you don't want. You don't ever mention it. You always mention what you want, what you're doing, or what you're going to accomplish. I've 2-putted or better all my greens in the last 2 events. Imagine when you start imprinting like that. That's one of the things that we require in our performance analysis. So I asked her, I said, so can you describe for me what your work looks like on your 4-footers? Can you describe for me what your training looks like? And she said, sure, I can do that. She goes, first of all, everything is defined, it's measured, and it's timed. I'm like, all right. She goes, the 4-footers, she goes, it's the first thing that I start with every day. And that's why we train our athletes. It's the first thing they start with. And why is that? It's the easiest shot in golf. And it's the most important. And let me rephrase that. It's important that she builds the confidence in the easiest shot in golf so that she can pull it off every single time. Also, more times than not, that 4-footer is going to determine my final score of that hole. And she's 100% in making her 4-footers. So I asked this, I said, so give me some more details about describing your training. She goes, well, when I set up my training, she goes, again, everything is defined. It's measured in time. So first of all, She goes, I use the following criteria. The distance is defined, it's 4 feet. The putt is either level or slightly uphill. The break is either slightly right to left for a right-handed golfer, or left to right for a left-handed golfer, or it's straight. Okay? And she goes, I do this for 50 minutes each day. Now, when I catch fire, I keep going. And she goes, on each putt, she goes, I do the following. Okay? And this is we're going to start getting into this performance piece for you, okay? This is really cool. So she said, on each putt, I do the following in training. I build a strategy, which is what we call preloading the shot. You build a strategy, number 1. 2, she commits to that strategy. 3, she physically rehearses the strategy. That's rehearsing the swing, the movement, the setup, everything. Next is she runs the 3-step mindset program. Next is she executes the shot. After she executes the shot, she reinforces the solutions. After that shot, we call reloading the shot, to put solutions in place if she needs it. And she says, it takes me 12 seconds to run my mindset program on every single putt. As you can see, she is describing her steps in performing the putt. She's describing here the steps in performing. So let's go through this again. So she builds the strategy. She commits to the strategy. She physically rehearses that strategy. She runs the mindset program so that she can control her thoughts over the ball. She executes the shot. After she executes the shot, she reinforces the solutions, and it takes her 12 seconds to run that mindset program every single time. This is what she does in training. And I asked her, I said, so what's your personal best? She immediately fired off 125. I'm like, wow. Why is that your personal best? I always ask questions. She said, because my job in training is, did I lose you guys? No, you guys are still there. Sorry. You guys are still up? Okay. All right. So she said, my job in training is to isolate and master the steps of performing well. I'm going to say that again. Her job in training is to isolate and master the steps of performing well. That's your job in training. That's it. And I said, okay, what's your goal in competition? My goal in competition is to execute the steps of performing. You kind of get an idea of where I'm going at here. My job in competition is to execute the steps of performing. My goal in training is to isolate and master the steps of performing well, and my job in competition is to execute the steps of performing. And when you're working on 4-footers, I said, when you're working on these 4-footers, are you trying to make these putts? She said, no way, I'm not trying to make them. My focus is purely on performing the steps. That's how you've trained me. On distance putting, is your focus on making the 30 or 40-foot putt? She said, no. The goal is to run the steps of performing and to see how close I can roll the ball to the target. I'm not trying to hit it. I'm not trying to hit the target. I'm seeing how close I can roll it. Okay? So I said, why are we trying to hit the green or the target? Why are we trying so hard to hit the green and target? More importantly, many golfers are trying to hit, think about this, this is crazy. Many golfers are, not many as a quantity, are trying to hit the flag from 150 yards or more. They're trying to hit the flag, not trying to get it close to the area. So when all these athletes are trying to hit the flag from 150 yards, 180 yards, 200 yards, what have you, I mean, how's that working for you? It's not. And she says, and she goes, what happens is, she says, when I did this, she goes, I completely moved away from executing my steps when I was playing. She goes, I don't do it on the putting green because, Sean, she goes, because I've done that a lot longer. And that's within reason, because she's been with us for a few months in this training, and she's learned how to do it in putting, and her putting is exceptional. Now we've got to migrate this into her full shots. But by learning it in putting, she's answered all the questions that my focus is on running the steps of performing. And my goal in competition is basically performing these steps. And when you move away from performing these steps, you're going to be in trouble. So I asked her, I said, so, let's dive into this a little bit more. I said, so what does her training look like on approach shots, right? So we talked a little bit about the putting piece, right? And the steps in performing. Building the strategy, committing to the strategy, going through the commitment phase of the strategy, physically rehearsing the shot that you're going to hit, running the mindset program, executing the shot, and then reinforcing. Okay? So now we're going to kind of shift a little bit to help her on her approach shots. What does that look like? Okay? So if you take all of these things that we're working on, they're no different. They're part of the Olympic model. They're transparent to putting, from 4-footers to distance putting to short game to pitch shots to distance wedges to full shots. The Olympic training model follows all of that. Okay, so the main key is in your training, you have to install the consequences, the pressure, the tension in the training with running all the steps of performing that we've been discussing. Okay? Now, in the training, your focus has to shift and isolate to mastering these steps in performing well. Okay? This will give you the greatest opportunity to perform well in training. But you've got to have the pressure, the consequences, because I'm going to ask you right now, what has the highest consequences? Training does. Competition does. Competition has more consequences than training. Why doesn't our training have more consequences than competition? And if it does, your competition's going to feel lighter. She's not going to be in these kinds of situations, because the putting and the short game and all that has been, because that's what she's learned. Now we're going to move into the distance wedge training, and we're going to move into the full shots with her. Okay, so this is going to give her the greatest opportunity now in competition, because she's learned these things in putting. She just wasn't thinking how to take this from the putting piece into the full shot. One is we just really hadn't gotten there yet. But I wanted to share that with you because, yeah, she's going through it as well, just like you. But we've got to follow the steps in performing and define those steps. It's got to be defined, it's got to be measured, and it's got to be timed. And but this will give you the opportunity to compete at a higher level when you do this. I think it's, two things that I think that we can take away from this is that there's too much training on the technical side, even when things are going great, and even when things go south. And the second piece is that the training doesn't have higher consequences. And that's been my whole goal over these last 19 years in building this system of EPS, taking it from the Olympic piece into the NFL, is teaching and training these athletes to understand what pressure is like and what stress is like and what tension is, so that when they get in competition, it feels light. I mean, I don't know if you saw on my Facebook page, I just posted a video of one of my students. She's 14 years old, and she just made 330 4-footers in a row. 330. Her previous best was 286. People say, well, that's impossible. No, it's not impossible. What we're doing is we're training the impossible. And the last 3 events, she's made everything inside of 5 feet. She's 14. Why? Because it's the way she trains. And that's what we're giving these athletes the opportunity to do, is to learn how to train. Oh, it reminds me. Let me tell you. There's a great story of a young girl that was playing at the University of Cincinnati. Coach Janet Carl. Great longtime friend. Excellent coach. Coaches at UC. She's been up there close to 20 years. Does an excellent job. She had a player, and her player averaged right around 74, had a 74 scoring average. She hit like 95% of her fairways on a regular basis, and she hit like 16, 17 greens every single time she played. But she averaged 4 3-putts. She averaged 4 3-putts every time she played. Okay? So I watched her, how she trained, and she'd always putt with this training aid on these short putts. And that's all what she always went to, was this training aid that she used. And I mean, that's a whole different topic, but training aids, they're good if they're used in the right way. But if they're used to perform outcome, you're in trouble. Okay? I'm just telling you, you're in trouble. And here's the reason why, is because they're not brain compatible. All right? They don't teach you how to build strategies. They don't teach you how to commit to the strategy so that you can confidently pull the trigger every single time. They work as a crutch. But if they're used right, that you can assist and learn to build confident decisions and pull the trigger. Okay? But she always went to this training aid. We removed the training aid. She started freaking out. And we taught her how to train with her 4-footers by building the strategy and following the steps of performing. Training aids don't do that. Training aids don't allow you to follow your steps in performing, and that's what you're supposed to do in training, is isolate and master the steps of performing well. Isolate and master the steps of performing well. Training aids don't allow you to do that in training. I don't know why they're called training aids. Okay? So we instituted the 4-foot training piece and also the distance putting piece. And that's all I worked on with her, was the distance putting and the 4-footers. And these are extensive training models and components within the modules that we use. I mean, they're extensive. So this went on for about 3 or 4 months. She finished the fall season. Spring's coming around, okay? And I'm starting to see some progress made, all right? They're going to Florida to play in an event. 36 holes first day, 18 second. That's pretty common in college golf today. So Coach Carl sent me a text. They played the pre-tournament round. They built strategies. So they go out and play the first 18 holes of the event. She sent me a note. She said, our player just played 18 holes without a 3-putt. She goes, personal best. I'm like, holy cow. She goes, unbelievable. She shot 67. She's in the lead. I said, text me and let me know what happens in the second round. Second round comes around, and I'm waiting. It's another 4.5 hours later. Get another text. You're not going to believe it. She just played 36 holes with a 2-putt or better. No 3-putts. New personal best. Because of this training, right? Next day goes around. Now you're thinking there might be a self-image adjustment, or is she even thinking about it? All coaches having conversations with them is focus on the steps of performing, running all the steps. It's all you got to do. I got a text. What do you guess? What do you think happened? 2 putts or better in the final round. 3 consecutive rounds of 2 putts or better every single round. And the focus is on running the steps of performing. But first of all, you got to understand what the steps are in performing. And she was so attached to the technical piece and training that she could not focus on anything else. And she thought it was always the technical piece that was keeping her from performing. And that's really not always the case. We have to teach our athletes how to build strategies, trust and commit to those strategies, physically commit to them, run a mindset program, have a program where they can control their thoughts, execute the shot, and then reinforce. And if we can do that, we're going to play better golf. No doubt. Look, I hope you've enjoyed this broadcast this evening as much as I've enjoyed putting it together for you. You can join me each Wednesday here at 8 p.m. Central and 9 Eastern. And hey, if you know somebody that could benefit from this training, pass it along to them. Hey, our goal is to help as many people as we possibly can. And also, hey, if you're interested in being part of our private client group, hey, message me. I'd be more than happy to set up a discovery call and give you a little bit more insights on these types of training that we're doing with these athletes. Also, you can reach me at my email at Shawn, that's SHAWN, at Shawn Humphreys, that's HUMPHRIES, Shawn at ShawnHumphreys.com, or you can reach me by my direct line. It's 972-793-7255. Oh, before I go, I am hosting 3 college golf training camps in Palm Beach, Florida, our training facility. I'm going to have college coaches come in. It's going to be 2 days of training. We're going to do classroom time. We're going to teach the athletes these training segments. And if you really want to get a serious kickstart in this EPS Olympic training, these 2 days of camps, they're the bomb. It's the answer. So you can check it out on my site and training at ShawnHumphreys.com. Click on the training. Give me a call and we can discuss. Thanks for joining me, and I will see you next Wednesday. Have a great evening.